Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and I am the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture. Welcome to the fourth episode of the sixth season of the Center's Religion and series. Religion and is a series of monthly conversations between leading academics and practitioners hosted by the Center to engage and enhance critically important conversations on the state of religion in America. The last episode was an exciting conversation at the intersection of religion, philanthropy, and the concept of big giving in the midst of political uncertainty. I want to thank David King, Jason Garrett, Catherine Osborne, and Benjamin Soskis for a wide-ranging and quite informative discussion. If you didn't get a chance to catch that episode, please check it out on our YouTube channel, or if you just want to listen to this or any episode, we are now available everywhere you download your favorite podcasts. Today, we continue to think about the state of the university, our classrooms, and specifically teaching in the midst of this political uncertainty. Today's panelists will explore religion and teaching in times of tension. They've asked us to think about what happens to our scholarship and teaching when trust in our institutions begins to falter, with increased scrutiny and pressure on our campuses, and really pressure from the broader public. Studying and teaching religion can start to feel unbearable. And so, in this episode, we're going to examine the implications of this tension on teachers and thinkers and scholars of religion. We're gonna do away with big introductions today because we want to get as much time for our discussion as possible. So I'm just going to introduce our host for today, and he is going to start us off. I want to introduce a friend of the center, and dare I say, a giant in our field, Dr. Robert Orsi. Let's get started, folks.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Thank you for that warm welcome. It's good to be back at the center, even if virtually. I want to welcome the panelists. I'm very excited to be in conversation with you, Atalia Omer, Nikki Young, Matthew Kressler. And I also want to give a welcome to the online audience. I'm sure it includes many old friends of all of us. I give a warm greeting to all of you, and I wish I could see you in person, but that's not possible. The very fact of our gathering here today, even virtually, to talk about these issues is, I think, a sign of something hopeful and positive in our time. And I really do want to begin on that. I want to thank Phil Goff, Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and the Center for making this conversation possible. I think such meetings will become increasingly important if our universities continue to cave to political and economic pressure. So I want to begin now with just a brief table setting, and then I will turn to our panelists and bring them right in. So just this morning in the New York Times, M. Gesson had an editorial on Gaza, which began, the opening sentence was, "We are living in an upside down world." And again this morning, I got an email from the American Historical Association, which described the moment of time that we find ourselves in as unprecedented. Quite a striking word for historians of all scholars to use to call this time unprecedented. I think the assumption of inevitable progress, of a forward trajectory that today will lead inevitably to a better tomorrow, is both a value, but in a deeper sense, it's constitutive. It's fundamentally constitutive of the disciplines of modern academic inquiry. That temporality, that particular from to temporality, I think shapes how we tell our stories. And central to this narrative in the political sphere is the idea that secular democracy is the best system of governance, as exemplified by the United States, for all its betrayals of its own ideals. This confidence has been shattered over the last decade. We've gone from could it happen here to it could happen here to it's happening here. We know, of course, that what's being done today to immigrants in the United States has been done before, that the law has been wielded against indigenous communities and African Americans to deprive them of life and liberty, including religious liberty, and that the human rights of queer and trans people have been denied. Likewise, the murders in the Caribbean follow a long history of extra-legal killings by the American government. everything has a precedent. But then again, seemingly not. Remember the word unprecedented. I think what Gessen and the AHA are saying or trying to say, and I hear this from lots of people, is a deeper apprehension that this moment is a rupture from what has gone before in some fundamental way. Gramsci's sentence has been going through my mind, that old sentence by Antonio Gramsci, which I hear so much these days, it's become almost a cliche or a kind of motto for our times, which is that the old order is dead, the new one is not yet born. And we live in a time of what Gramsci called the monstrous, and which I take it meant both the monstrous, but also phenomena we don't understand, phenomena we can't quite grasp in the languages we have. So this is a political crisis, but it's also a moral crisis. It's an epistemic crisis. It's even a metaphysical crisis, and it is a pedagogical crisis. So we are at a moment, and I think again I want to thank the Center for giving us this space and time to think about this. So I think, I mean, what we have, what the key question for today is a version of Max Weber's famous question in The Scholar's Vocation, and that is, what does the scholar's work look like today? What does the scholar of religion and religious history look like today in 2025, 2026 in our current circumstances? So I want to start by asking the panelists if there's anything you want to add to what I just said, challenge, take exception to, and so forth. Does anybody want to say anything? Talia, do you have thoughts about this? And then I'll go to Matthew. I'll move to Matthew in a second. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Bob. Yeah, I mean, immediate kind of thought, immediate thought that comes to my mind is that uh, actually it's not unprecedented, the moment, and that just since you open with the story about Gaza and the genocide, it's important to note that the Palestine exception in the universities have been in place for many, many years before the current moment. And also that our universities are entangled in a very material way with the realities of genocide and colonialism and extraction and so forth. So I wanted to put that on the
Yeah,
table
yeah,
immediately.
yeah. Anyone else? Nikki, Matthew, Nikki?
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. Part of what jumps out to me is not just that it's not unprecedented, but that the precedents are repetitive and that they are so visible in many areas of our human experience. They're precedented in as much as we have lowered access to healthcare and food. And so what you're describing, we might be able to apply to the very real and tangible experiences of higher education and what we teach and what we experience, but we can truly apply these same threats to a sense-making sensation of destruction in so many other areas of our life. And I'm really interested in this conversation because I can imagine us talking about it as scholars of religion, and we could talk about it as neighbors and friends who are trying to access healthcare, make sure we have clean water, make sure that our neighbors have food, and so on. So it's really kind of precedents reminding all over the place. So I appreciate the question.
Yeah, yeah. Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Nikki and Natalia both said about, I love that metaphor of the repeating precedent, the unprecedented coming again and again. I also was thinking, I appreciated the framing, when you were talking about this kind of upside down world, this unprecedented time, you didn't talk about it as 2025. You at the very least like stretched it to a decade. And I appreciated the stretching of the decade because I think that my kind of my journey as a teacher and a scholar and a writer has kind of very much been shaped not by like what's happening right now, but what has happened, what has transpired over the last 10 to 15 years. And I kind of preparing for this conversation went back to some things that I'd written over the past few years. And I, found a piece I wrote in the immediate aftermath of the Charlottesville the death of Heather Heyer and the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, and which these conversations are always an invitation to kind of like look back at the narratives of your own life as scholar and teacher. And that was, I think, one moment for me where I could pinpoint a kind of urgency about shifting how I think about history and teaching. And then prior to Charlottesville, I was finishing my PhD when Trayvon Martin was killed. I began teaching when Michael Brown was murdered. In the aftermath of the Mother Emanuel massacre was when I got my job at the College of Charleston. So it feels like if we want to mark this time as upside down or unprecedented, it feels like it's the result of a kind of unraveling over the past 10 to 15 years. But I think, as Nikki and Natalia have noted, like an unraveling that is the roots of which go far, far deeper than
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, Natalia, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to underscore the point that no, it's not the moment is not unprecedented, and of course there is profound continuity between liberalism and fascism that we see is playing out. But also, again, I want to kind of bring to the foreground what Gaza signifies, and the utter impunity, and just how it really exposes. Basically, the masks are off, so it's not unprecedented. It's just the masks are off, and it becomes very clear from a kind of global and transnational perspective,
Yeah,
including in our classrooms, of
yeah,
course.
yeah. No, Gaza, and what you're calling the Palestinian exception, is hangs heavy over this conversation, very heavy over this conversation. I don't want to belabor this point, but I want to pause for just a moment over unprecedented, because of course I agree with you all. But again, I worry. I have Hannah Arendt's warning in my head that we need to be aware of when something new is on the horizon, that if we miss what is new, then we won't be able to respond adequately to the time. And I was thinking, well, what's new? I mean, you're right. Nothing's ever new to historians, and yet the AHA did say unprecedented this morning. So, is there some way we can nuance this to to recapture something of the new? I mean, I wrote down a list of, when I was thinking about this before the conversation I have here: post-liberal, oligarchic, AI-driven, alt-right Catholic, environmental destruction, dystopia, white supremacist neo-colonialism. It seems like there's a stew boiling that is at once made up of everything that we just said, and yet somehow has attained a new shape. Like a monster that's been made in the lab out of familiar parts, but that is now roaming free on the globe with its own life and vitality. Does that make any sense?
Yes. Yes. Can I jump in here? I
Yeah.
really appreciate your reference to Hannah Arendt here, because what makes it new, in my understanding, isn't the language. In fact, you sort of lifted up a series of conceptual frames that we can use to understand what's happening again and again. But what makes it new is the inescapable materiality. That when we're experiencing them in renewed ways on new bodies, again in different places in our bodies, in different environs, with different sensibilities, they become, in essence, a new thing. And I think that
Yeah, yeah,
avoiding the idea of repetition as old, but instead as newly discoverable, is really,
yeah.
so the materiality is the piece for me. And just to slide in here, this is why I'm invested in, and I'm sure we'll get to talk to later when you mention the political and moral and epistemic crises. This is why the matter is epistemic for me. How we are making meaning of and understanding
Absolutely.
information that comes through this materiality is really key. But I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to
yeah,
take up too much
yeah, yeah.
space.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, let's move just a little bit forward, and I want to ask how the work you're doing now itself reflects in your own understanding, and again, acknowledging the precedented, unprecedented dimension, and putting a pin in that for just a moment. how your work, the work you're doing at the moment, reflects engages this upside down moment we're in. Matthew, did you want to start with that, and then I'll.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think that when, I mean, I think it continues the conversation about the precedented and the unprecedented because, and to the point that Nikki was raising about thinking about the epistemic and methodological and pedagogical crises that this kind of invites. I mean, maybe that's what the AHA is trying to say when they name unprecedented. Like, I think that this moment, new and old, kind of, and everlasting, what has been new for me, and I think that is something I see with my colleagues and friends, many of whom are like in the space, among the four of us, but also in the chat, is a real rupture and shift in how we study what we study and what seems urgent
Yeah.
to write about and to structure our thought around. And I say that as a scholar of African American religion and Catholicism who is always writing about racism and racial justice, right? So it's not that I'm like just now like writing about violence or horror, but the monstrous has been evoked a few times, and like I was thinking as we were getting ready to have this conversation that basically everything I've been doing over the past decade has been some form or fashion of trying to tell U.S. Catholic history in a very different way,
Well,
and
let's
it's
pause.
been affected by that. Yeah.
Let's pause over that for just a second, since I'm very familiar with your current project. So Matthew is working on this very important retelling of American Catholic history. So after the sunshine of the Second Vatican Council, and given the power of the linear progress narrative, I think it's fair to say that many liberal Catholics in the United States pretty much thought the old battles were over. They were over and done with. We could move on now to new horizons. And this is reflected in the historiography. I was thinking that, we know so much about Dorothy Day. There are endless books and dissertations on Dorothy Day, but we know far less about the American Catholic enthusiasm for Franco and the fascism of the Spanish Civil War. And that, in fact, if you're going to, and I know this is what you're doing, if you're going to tell the history of American Catholicism, that's probably a more significant moment, the American commitment to Franco's fascism, than Dorothy Day. So it's a question, would you say that your work is, what would you say, shifting the field and the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the metaphor that I've been having in my head is that it's I'm getting a sense of vertigo as I look back at U.S. Catholic history because it's a disorienting experience to be seeing what is there in plain sight in pretty much every history of conservatism over the last century to 2 centuries, and is there in pretty much every history of Catholics for the past century to 2 centuries, is that um, many Catholics have sought a certain kind of racial and sexual and gendered order, have fought for it, violently in many cases, and that for every Dorothy Day, or we could even say for every kind of liberal Catholic writing in the pages of Commonweal and America, there are, let's say, modestly speaking, 1,000 ordinary Catholics
Many,
who
many
go to,
more, many
yeah,
more.
many more who go to mass every day, who send their kids to parochial school and throw bricks at buses as they're trying to desegregate
Yeah,
schools. And
yeah,
so Italia, I just want to like highlight again Italia's metaphor of not unprecedented, but the masks are off. And I think that
yeah.
is kind of what I'm kind of looking back on over history, where it's like this thing that has so often been written as a subterranean kind of current that is like there on the side or on the margins of the history, may in fact be, the river in which we're swimming and have been for a while.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking. And Atalia, I know you've been. I see Nikki's hand, and I'll get to Nikki. I'll call on you right now, but I just wanted to note that Atalia and I participated in a seminar a while ago on Maya Kahana, and the same thing is true of Maya Kahana in American Jewish history, right? So, I was thinking, a lot of historians, distinguished, learned historians of American Judaism have preferred to leave Maya Kahana out. And now it doesn't look like was such a good idea. And it's the same thing as you say with, with the Spanish Civil War. I was thinking of Edmund Walsh, the Jesuit at Georgetown, who was, one of the leading anti-communists really of the Cold War era. So yes, Nikki, join in, please.
No, no, no. I'm so sorry. I was scratching my nose. Please
Oh,
continue. I'm
okay.
just scratching.
All
Yeah,
right,
sorry.
Atalia, what do you think?
What do I think about the point about Kahana or?
No, the point about these histories are being now upended in some ways. I mean, look, the linear progress narrative is not just a set of words, it's deeply embedded in the structure of modernity. We cannot think. I mean, I'm sure we've seen this with our students. We can't think without everything getting better. In some way, everything, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. Well, with all due respects to Martin Luther King and with a tip of the hat to St. Augustine, I'm not sure about that. Um, that's what I was wondering if you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very much. Um, yeah, I feel it very urgently, especially in the current moment. But I've been um, wrestling with this point for a long time, especially practicing as part of my own journey as a scholar, looking at religion, nationalism, religion, political violence, and also really wanting to think transformatively, constructively, because I'm also kind of grounded in peace studies and thinking specifically about Palestine, Israel. So there has been for many, many years a focus on really creating archives of the kind of atrocities that has been happening for over at least a century. You have all those archives of the Nakba, of the catastrophe against Palestinians, that of course started before the actual the event of the Nakba of 47 to 49.
Right.
It started with basically a British lord promising the land to Jews from Europe. So kind of like the assumption is that, oh, if you only showed the evidence of people being driven away from their, villages, being uprooted, massacres, then you have the evidence, and then something will happen. It will be, transformed because the truth is apparent. And what we see and has become so clear in the past 2 years plus is that within the context of our universities, where the knowledge production, the students are watching a genocide unfolding on their phones, live streamed, and their teachers, the administrators, the adults are telling them what you see is not what you see. And then, the question is how does it happen? How does it how does this spin work?
Yeah,
What
yeah, yeah,
enable this spin?
yeah. And what's the
Uh,
answer? What enables this thing?
yeah, this is where you really need to go into kind of like the architecture of modernity. And this is where religion is the category is very critical
Yeah, I want to
to
get
the
to that.
analysis. Yeah.
Absolutely. I do want to get to that. Any of the, yeah, Nikki.
Well, I'll say, I mean, I think Atalia is just right on here. I think creating archives as both pedagogy and as practice is an important investment in truth telling. That,
Mhm.
part of what responds, I think, Bob, to what you're concerned about with MLK's arc reference here is not just the progressive quality, but that it is the gaze is pointed almost in the wrong direction. And I don't want to get into an argument with Dr. King's ghost here about that, but what I want to say
Well,
is
he was living in a different time. It
different
was
time.
not this time. I mean, that may mark the difference between that statement and my inability to say that statement confidently may very well mark part of the epistemic shift. I'm sorry, Nikki.
Mm.
No, but you're exactly right. I mean, I think that's the place. The place that we occupy helps orient our perspectives. And doing archival work really retrains our students, but retrains our brains to thinking about what has happened before and how do we make sense of it right now, which is a different project than continuing to invest in the possibility of moral difference in a progressive way. And in doing that in a progressive way sometimes relieves people from the responsibility of looking at Gaza. It
Yeah,
relieves
yeah.
the responsibility of attending to Sudan, et cetera. Right. Like, so
Mhm.
I'm interested in what you both are offering here, all three of you, really.
I'll tell you, and then I'll come back to Matthew. You look like you want to say something too. See, I'll tell
Yeah, I
you.
just wanted just kind of like a two finger because so I was thinking about the point about kind of like the assumption that of that like that knowledge can be transformative and that there is this like the kind of teleological movement toward justice, whatever that means. And I was thinking, I was reflecting of work that really influenced my thinking about this question by Nadia Abul-Haj about exactly that, where she challenges Said and this note, because Said was very much actually grounded, Edward Said, and his analysis of, Orientalism and also, the permission to narrate for Palestinians. And then once they narrate, once the story is out, once the archive is out, then of course it will move, in the good direction toward justice. And the fact is that no, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's so she wrestles with that, and I think we actually see it play out. This is where the masks are off. Um,
Right. I
Yeah, can
want to
I
come back to
jump?
that, Matthew, please, and then I want to come back to what the dot 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 is. And I see some questions after your comment. I'm
Yeah.
wondering, Atalia, so
Well,
then what follows? But go ahead, Matthew.
yeah. Well, I just wanted to build on I really appreciate, Nikki, you're invoking the archive and Natalia building on it, because I think for me that really unlocked something about this precedented, unprecedented thing, right? I think that for me, certainly like what has unfolded in my life and the lives around me over the last 10 years has shaped definitively how I approach teaching and scholarship. So that's a kind of like unprecedented, right? But when you go back to the art, the sense of vertigo I'm experiencing is like an experience of vertigo in the archive, right? When I'm in the paper, letters written in the 60s, documents published in the 20s and 30s, the vertigo comes from the sense that it is that repetitive, right, across time, that the language that's being used to justify the disappearing of pro-Palestinian activists and immigrants is the same language that's being used, by folks who are in the streets resisting desegregation in the 60s, the same language that's being printed in Catholic, magazines in the 1920s and 30s that are pro-fascist, right? And so I think that point about the archive and how that kind of brings, and then Natalia's addition that like that a certain more, maybe I'll just say it because moral crisis was invoked at the beginning, right? A certain moral framework is required to engage the archives in this way, because as Natalia points out, like the archive in and of itself is not kind of like directing in one particular progressive direction or another.
Nikki, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I just want to ask Matthew. So then, if we named that how would you describe the moral crisis? What is it?
Uh, you mean the one that we're in right now? I mean, I'm kind of taken with Italia's "the maths are off" metaphor. I think that as much so. I was kind of laughing at the beginning because, like, Bob, your point, like, we're historians and folks who are kind of like trained in like the humanities, like we're primed to say like nothing is unprecedented, everything is like we all like we can all cite like centuries of precedent, right? But invoking our students, right, for a lot of folks who are seeing the world through the lens of like that modernity has kind of like given us, right? Like this is a kind of shaking of how they view the structure of things. And so I don't know.
There's a new
The
generation. Yeah, there's a new,
yeah, yeah.
there are young eyes looking at old stories. And so then what does that mean?
And even
Uh,
older eyes that are now seeing masks on, masks off, right? I mean, I think
right.
that's been one of the most striking things of the last few years is how many my father and mother-in-law like out in the streets, right? Like, folks who
Right, right.
have been schooled their whole lives in a particular story that are now seeing a different one.
So I
But
want
yes, young
to.
people as well.
I think we've segued. There's a question for you, Atalia, a very straightforward question. Can you say the name again of the scholar who you say contested Said's
Yeah,
idea?
yeah. Anthropologist Nadia Abu El-Haj was based at the University of Columbia.
Thank you. So I want to get so let's now. I think we're segueing into teaching. I mean, there's never, in my mind, that much of a difference between scholarship and teaching. They inform each other in very deep ways. And so we're there, I think. Atalia, when you say that knowledge itself does not persuade, I mean, you could present people with all the facts and it doesn't persuade. Does that imply anything about classroom practice and what classroom practice ought to be or could be at the moment in such a way? Because we're so used to thinking, and I mean, I think to this extent, I am kind of a Weberian. When he says we are placed behind the lectern solely as teachers, and what does that mean? So solely as teachers, we we bring students to uncomfortable realities and invite them to make their own decisions about those realities, making sure they understand that there will be consequences for how they choose. Okay, so that's a very particular understanding of the pedagogical role. What are you thinking about a classroom practice these days?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge that it really depends on the professor, the faculty, on vulnerability and precarity,
Yes,
which is a
absolutely,
real. It's
absolutely.
especially in the kind of classes that I teach, which involves Palestine, Judaism, Israel, Palestine, Palestine, Israel, settler-colonialism, apartheid, all those like keywords. So unfortunately, and I think I probably should name it, I have to do a lot of work, not as me, the expert who is immersed in the material and the scholarship, but a lot of identity work, just because that I'm even able to be there in the classroom and teach and say those words because I'm Jewish, because I'm Israeli. And that's very, very important point to name and wrestle with and question and challenge. But in terms of the syllabi, in terms of the pedagogies, one has to be very upfront with the students, and first of all, explain to them and really have a conversation about epistemic violence, about power knowledge, introduce them to Edward Said, but also explain to them about the syllabus, why the choices that we make, and how the choices what is a syllabus? Like really explain to the students what is a syllabus, because it's so critical. I mean, in reference to this particular case, it becomes so clear. So why do I choose Palestinian scholars? We didn't need, the Jewish Israeli historians. They often talk about the revisionist historians in the 90s, but Palestinian historians and just thinkers and just Palestinians talked about, the Nakba from the very beginning, and use
Right,
and
right.
use concepts and discourses and theoretical frames about racism from a global perspective, use colonialism, even settler colonialism, and also talked about the what happened in terms of uprooting and so why do we need the Jewish Israeli historians to say it in order to validate the knowledge? So the students need to be become aware of that. And actually, I do want to highlight something about kind of the unprecedentedness of the moment in the classroom, because as a result of this, the genocide in Gaza, and that everyone had access to the evidence and have access to the evidence, because it's live stream, which is unprecedented. It is this. I mean, that's never happened
Oh, that's
before.
that's important to note. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually, it offered, and then it manifested. Yes, it's like it's somewhere, in the MENA region, but it manifests on our campuses in the United States in such clear way, because it offered a moment of decoloniality, in a sense of everything has been determined by methodological nationalism. The analysis is kind of like ends, the analysis about like religion, nationalism, and whatever is happening ends within the geopolitical boundaries that are not, the product of historical development. And all of a sudden, people like students realized for themselves that wait a second, that those kind of differentiation between, Israel within 48, 67, and Gaza, everything like all of a sudden kind of became disrupted,
Right.
which also explains the doubling down on actually, no, you are not allowed to know. You are not allowed to ask questions. You are not allowed to say
Well,
those
I
words.
wanted to, if I can
Yeah,
jump in, I wanted to
yeah,
actually underscore that. And then I have two questions that I want to read to you. But I do want to underscore that an acquaintance of mine who teaches at a large state university described where they have put into place certain restrictions on speech, which is common now, including at my own university, but in many universities. He referred to stepping in front of the classroom as stepping before a firing squad, because what he meant by that was that any individual student could make a case, bring a case by the new rules put in place. Any individual student could call out a professor for not respecting. So the Palestinian moment has had enormous consequences in all directions in terms of silencing. So if you say something, well, America, white supremacy has been central to American history. A student can decide that that's defaming the United States and
yeah,
call you out. So the question of vulnerability, especially younger faculty who are just starting out, is terrible right now.
yeah,
And and I think of Václav Havel's comment that maybe we should think about spaces outside the university, adjacent to the university, where it might be better to do our work rather than in these
yeah,
places which are so money
yeah,
driven
yeah,
and so concerned about piling up money. And so wary of offending anybody that there are serious limits on knowledge production. Go ahead, one thing, and then I'm going to read the comment.
yeah. I just want to say that I'm reflecting at actually the moment of radical learning and pedagogy in the student encampments, actually,
Yes, yes,
where
yes,
people
right,
were sitting on the ground together and
right,
actually learning because they did not get it in the classroom. I
right,
mean,
right.
but it was a very exhilarating moment of teaching and transformation, actually.
Okay, so here's a question from a friend and a colleague in Canada. Thank you for this amazing conversation. Thank you for that comment. As a religious studies student at Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada, I'm wondering, with the war in Gaza, debates over genocide, renewed white supremacy, and the rise of AI and social media, are we facing an epistemic crisis for the Western model of modernity that has shaped religious studies? How do you think our teaching should change when students can see in real times the gaps and double standards in liberal human rights and modernity that our curricula were built upon? And what kinds of scholarship and methods do you think we need now to respond responsibly in our teaching and writing? So that was we had sort of embarked on
Mhm.
that. Would anybody else like to address that? Matthew, Nikki?
I
Um,
mean, I can just say a word just to kind of complete a thread in
yes, go
reference
ahead.
to this question, that a lot of what I introduce my students, someone who teaches on this, but is to um, especially as a scholar of religion, to show them through interacting with counter archives on Jewish history, for instance, or Jewish um, how the particular kind of history of modernity of Christian European modernity has shaped and negated um, the kind of the all these other Jewish archives, and part of kind
Yes,
of the transformative hard work is to make it be visible again and really challenge kind of axiomatic discourse that is very reductive in terms of religion as it plays
right.
out in those
And how,
debates.
okay, Nikki, did you want to join? And I could see, and yeah, I have some follow-up questions. These are all very rich comments. Go ahead,
Well, I
Nikki.
was going to say that, this is a moment where I want to sort of pull back the scope a little bit to say, teaching in religion and teaching humanities in particular has always been a precarious endeavor, Right. There's a long sense of having conversations that are drawing on people's sense of values, narrations of realities that we're experiencing, and a reframing of evidence that we can all see that creates some sense of offense. That part isn't new right now, nor is, the experience of, ongoing white supremacist, heteropatriarchy, ableist, right? Like on and on. So those things aren't exactly new. And the pedagogical frames that I've experienced working over time and that I learned about working over time always took people back to their own epistemological framework that begins with their senses. So in basically, instead of gaslighting students into thinking about the world through a critical lens without asking them to think about it through a sort of tangible sensory lens, is one of the problems that we can avoid by asking folks to engage with their experiences. What are you seeing? How do you make meaning? What does that look like in your everyday life? Where are the conflicts? What do those conflicts feel like? Are the sort of pedagogical sort of tools that we can bring inside and outside of the classroom. And stepping in and out of positions of precarity means attending to the danger of offense, right? Saying, when I worry, or when you worry about commenting in our classroom about this subject by virtue of offending someone, what are we playing into? Like turning that experience, the very material and tangible experience, into the actual lesson. And naming a table. This is gaslight. When we all see that the sun is rising right now, and instead we're saying that it's raining, what is happening? What do we call that?
Well, but that might be the nature of our upside down world, to cite Gesson again, because I know that Talia, you have been taking people with Hillary Randisi to Palestine for a long time. That didn't go over very well, did it, with uh, certain academic authorities? And you don't have to talk about this, but I do want to note that what you're talking about, Nikki, of bringing students into contact with these realities is not necessarily what the contemporary neoliberal university is all about.
Well, oops, but we're here, right? I mean,
Right.
seriously,
Right.
Bob, like when I think about my best kitchen table learning, when I'm sitting around with my mother and aunties and cousins, there are two things that are happening. One, I'm probably listening to or getting lessons that I'm not supposed to hear.
Right.
That's key. And two, I'm hearing them through the stories and experiences over food, around smells, with
Yeah.
heat or air, or like there are these really significant sensory elements that help me make meaning. And I think inviting our students into those contexts and asking them to pay attention is the pedagogical practice. And I think that it's the only thing that will help us not gaslight. I don't know
Yeah.
what situations you all have been in,
Can I?
but
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. And then I have more
yeah.
questions. Yeah,
No,
go ahead.
I want to build on that, and it was there was a comment and or a question about can like appreciate Nikki getting concrete. Can we stay in the concrete space because folks teaching I'm not operating within a university right now, but I over this past year have taught in the DC jail through the Georgetown Prison and Justice Initiative, and um, I just was appreciating, Nikki, what you were saying about how you approach teaching, because that just kind of over the years was increasingly how I approach teaching, which is like fundamentally about, um, I mean, it was less and less and less about like needing to deliver X, Y, or Z content or get a kind of like particular kind of set of, you know, comprehensive, field, like, surveyed from start to finish. It was more about relationship building. It was more about establishing the space in which people could do the kind of work you're talking about, Nikki, where you're genuinely inviting the intellectual curiosity and critical thinking of folks to lead the class where it goes, which involves a lot of vulnerability on the part of the professor. So to go back to Atalia's point, like, I mean, that's like, you know, we can say that is always linked to like our precarity and our positionality. But that has been so like going back, so I feel myself going into the abstract, going back, like be concrete, like, okay, so I'm teaching less texts when I teach, so that I can spend more time inviting students into a course. So like I taught a course, oriented around Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, and like fully like a third of the class was the one book. And I'm like, yes, we're going to like sit in it and we're going to move through it slowly so that we can be more attentive to where it might lead us as individuals. And when you provide that place, again, like there are certain teaching contexts where you got 100 to 300 students and you can't do something like this easily. But when you have the space to do that, and you are able to kind of go where students lead, it brings you to some interesting spaces. So I was in the DC jail yesterday, and I was trying to talk about 20th century Catholic racism, and they were like, "Can we talk about like the authorization of the slave trade in the 1400s?" And then somebody was like, "But what about Constantine?" Like, and it was all of a sudden became a conversation about like the broad sweep of Christian history and power. And I think that um, concretely is it's involved it involves a kind of letting go, which again can be very scary, and in both kind of like literal and figurative senses.
I wonder if this is what our anonymous interlocutor is wanting when he, she, or they say, how do we teach in, about, through, against the current conditions of teaching and learning? I mean, that's a really big question. There's also economic. I mean, Northwestern is inching towards $90,000 a year. Students come largely now to do tech. Some public universities are limiting the amount of people that will can access to the humanities because they want to produce a certain kind of citizen. I mean, these are also realities in the current university that are not disconnected from the more abstract, so-called abstract conversation that we were having earlier, but are fundamentally related to it. As this world turns upside down, this is, I think, also part of it. I mean, there are times when I feel I'm a feeder. I'm participating in what amounts to a prep school for the finance and private equity industries. Um, okay,
Yeah, I mean, I know
go
that we
ahead.
are starting to run short on time, but in the reference to the program that I was a part of at Harvard, working with Hilary Rantisi on this course that had a dimension of taking students to the context, to Palestine, Israel. So the course was framed around narratives of displacement and belonging, so the level of narrative. So you hear stories, you hear people, but also very critically, and this is where it's threatening. And then there was the moment of opportunity of October 7th and the post-October 7th genocidal assault, and then kind of diverting attention from the genocide to Jewish feelings on American campuses. The key anchor of the course and the framing of the whole program is to an analysis of power, of structures, of violence, and it's only through that, and also since it was in religious studies or divinity school kind of framing, it's only at that point where we get an analysis of religion that is intersectional, that is embedded in structures and all those kind of like local and global frames, that we can think constructively about religion in other ways,
Right.
introduce the students to this kind of conversations, not through like a simplistic, oh, let's all get together and coexist interfaith, which is often what happens in reference to religion, to those in terms of those conversations.
Okay, let me read another question. I think the group has already started to get into this, but the question specific to religious studies, I've heard people recently say things like, feel strange to teach the critique of the secular in this moment. I appreciate that. The idea being that students have a hard time seeing the perniciousness of its exclusions, contradictions next to some of the more aggressive violence and illiberalism of our moment. I think we're getting an answer with the talk of the architecture of modernity. I would love to hear what the group thinks. Um, if anybody has a thought about that, another way maybe of framing it is one of the things I'm concerned about as we enter this particular moment, as we're in this particular moment, is as powerful as the linear progress narrative is, the distinction between good and bad religion is equally powerful. One that haunts me more So one of the ideas, for example, why Maya Kahana, who was religious in all ways, and he was a rabbi and he was religious, and his ideas were rooted in traditions of learning and thought and so forth. Well, that's bad religion, and then there's good religion, and I'm just afraid that as we deal with these questions in the classrooms, and we rethink some things about the Enlightenment project I don't know if you all would agree with this, but all of a sudden do seem pretty good to me, that we've been hammering away at for so long,
Yeah.
that we're on the slippery slope to a kind of a new good bad religion distinction, and that seems what we must fight above all else. So yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna I'm gonna answer the question by posing another question to I think Nikki and Natalia, because I was also taken by this question and kind of what we
We
do
are
with our
running out of time, I must
yeah,
tell you.
I know. We what do we do with this critical study? I mean, the way that I would reformulate it, I don't know if it's exactly what the question is asking, is what do we leave our students with if we're thinking about the context of the class, and pedagogy? I don't think my classes have ever been classes that are offering a kind of like glowy progressive teleological vision of like the American political project, but not I have been invested in trying to offer students some set of alternatives, what people who have imagined the world otherwise, to use Sean Crawley's
Right.
category, right? So this is a question I'm asking Nikki and Natalia. I'm not regularly in the classroom these days, but like, what do I've been struggling with that in writing. I've been translating my work into comic books and talking about bad Catholics as a way to not call some people bad and other people good, but to ask people, like, what does it mean to be good or bad in the first place? Because a
Right.
lot of the people who thought they were doing good work were like throwing bricks at people.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
Nikki
you
and
have
Natalia, like, how do you deal with this?
Nikki, please, and then Natalia, and then we'll probably at the end. Please go ahead, Nikki.
I'll just quickly say my method as an ethicist is not to sort of articulate a normative version of what ethics should be, but to extract and to excavate what people are already doing. So I apply that same method in my work with my students. When I'm teaching about power and authority and complex ideas, I make use of the worlds in which they live, which often in a residential college community is campus. So even as much as we're redefining and making meaning of these terms and concepts, I ask them to think about particular structures and strictures that they see and experience on campus, and to note how they are participating. Where do they see the sort of simple things? If they're student orgs, if they can trace how money works, if they can understand access to resources, how does that make sense? Where does it sort of recreate in terms of a larger colonial project or not? And what do they want from this degree? Not why are they in my classroom, but what are they trying to get?
Yeah.
And why? Those
Right.
are the questions that I have students use and apply to some of these conceptual frames. Atalia.
Natalia, I think you have like 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay. No. I'll just kind of telegraph a few things. One, I've thought a lot about the question of good religion versus bad religion, and a lot of my scholarship and pedagogy is about kind of illuminating and wrestling and challenging any kind of like discourse of authenticity that is reductive and deeply problematic. And I was thinking about actually Zoran Mamdani's campaign, not only that his father actually literally wrote the book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, but Zoran also embodies really disrupting
Yes.
those categories by building a coalition. Yes, he's a very, very gifted politician, but it's the coalition, the intersectional, that really attend to material needs. But also, and this is where there is a challenge to kind of like a secular enlightenment uncritical discourse, he needed to be very clear about kind of the nuance of, Jews versus Zionism, how it connects to other kind of systems of power and so forth. So I want to contrast this with another kind of like the discourse about the saints versus the villains, the
Right.
Kahana versus, because I think we need to really challenge any kind of a psychologizing discourse or looking at kind of a fixation on individuals, because there is no Svaran without the, the movement and the
Right,
infrastructure
right.
of the movement and the critique that it builds on and so forth. And there is a lot to think there in terms of religion.
Well, maybe I thank you all. I know we're at the end. Maybe sometimes I think the study of religion can finally lose a certain modern innocence, that we might be at the point where we could study religion without the pretense of a kind of innocence,
Yeah.
which would be great.